I've always been drawn to the dark woods, the kind that stretch endlessly, their thick canopies blotting out the moonlight, leaving everything beneath in shadow. From a young age, I found some strange comfort in the silence and the stillness, even when others felt uneasy. Maybe it was the way the trees seemed to stand like silent sentinels, or how the cold air smelled sharp and clean compared to the city's staleness. But along with that fascination, I developed an acute awareness of how those woods could hide things. Things that don't want to be seen, things that don't belong. I'm not sure when the fear first took root, but it's been with me ever since I started venturing deeper than the usual trails. The woods at night are a different world, an ancient, living place that feels almost aware of you as you pass through. When darkness falls, the familiar turns alien, even the trees seem to lean closer, watching, waiting. I can still remember the first time I noticed how the quiet wasn't natural. It was the kind of silence so complete it presses against your ears, making every small sound feel enormous. The snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, even your own breath echoing unnaturally loud. That feeling has stayed with me through years of camping trips, hikes, and late-night wanderings. But it wasn't just a general unease. There were nights when something specific unsettled me, when the woods seemed to shift, to breathe differently, like the boundary between reality and something else was thinner, more fragile. Those nights are what I want to tell you about, starting with the first time I truly understood that the dark woods are not just empty spaces filled with trees and animals. It happened during a camping trip with some friends. We had chosen a spot deep in the forest, far from any roads or signs of civilization. The plan was simple: escape the noise of the city, enjoy the quiet, and sleep under the stars. We arrived just before sunset, pitching tents in a small clearing surrounded by towering pines and oaks. The air was cool and smelled of damp earth and pine needles. As the last light faded, we built a fire, its warm glow pushing back the darkness in a small circle around us. That first night was calm at first. We talked and laughed, passing around a bottle of whiskey, the flames casting flickering shadows on our faces. Above us, the canopy was so dense that the stars were mostly hidden, but patches of sky peeked through, pale and distant. The woods around us seemed still, as if they were holding their breath. I remember looking into the trees, wondering what was out there beyond the firelight. The deep blackness between the trunks seemed almost alive, swallowing sound and light. It wasn't long before the quiet started to feel oppressive. The usual nighttime sounds, the chorus of crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, were strangely absent. Instead, there were faint noises, subtle and unsettling. At first, we thought it was just the wind playing tricks, branches brushing against each other, maybe a small animal scurrying through the underbrush. But the sounds didn't quite fit that explanation. It began with the cracking of twigs, soft and deliberate, not the random snap of a startled squirrel or a falling branch. The rhythm was too steady, almost like footsteps pacing just beyond the firelight. Then came the whispers, barely audible, carried on the breeze, so quiet that no one was sure if they were hearing things. The voices were indistinct, like fragments of words, but they sent a chill through the group. One of my friends, Mark, was the first to notice something moving just beyond our circle of light. He squinted into the darkness and pointed. "Look," he said, voice low. "There's something there." We all turned to look, but the shadows shifted and the figure disappeared. It was only a silhouette, too vague to make out any details, more like a shadow detached from any obvious source. We told ourselves it was probably a deer or some other animal, a trick of the firelight and the trees. Still, the feeling of being watched settled over us. As the night deepened, the woods around us seemed to close in. The whispers grew louder, though no one could understand what they said. The footsteps circled our camp, faint but unmistakable, scraping against fallen leaves and dry branches. Every time someone glanced outward, the shadowy figure would vanish, always just out of reach. The fire crackled and popped, but it did little to dispel the growing tension. I found myself gripping my flashlight tighter, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. The beam cut through the gloom, illuminating nothing but empty trunks and thick brush. But I knew something was there. I felt it in my bones, a presence that wasn't human, something ancient and patient, watching us with cold intent. That night, sleep was impossible. We took turns staying awake, keeping the fire alive and trying to keep the fear at bay. Every snap of a twig, every rustle in the leaves, made our hearts race. We whispered about what could be out there, each suggestion more unsettling than the last. None of us wanted to admit that we might be dealing with something beyond our understanding. The woods felt alive in a way I had never experienced before, as if the trees themselves were watching, waiting, and guarding some secret. The darkness was thick and heavy, pressing down on us like a living thing. It was in that moment I realized how little control we had out here, how fragile our sense of safety was when surrounded by the unknown. That first night in the dark woods marked the beginning of a series of experiences I still struggle to explain. It was the night I learned that the forest holds more than just animals and trees, that it can harbor something else, something that feeds on fear and silence. And that's where the story truly begins. That night, after the fire had dimmed to glowing embers, we all settled into an uneasy quiet. The forest's silence was no longer empty, it was thick with anticipation, like the air before a storm. We were a group of 6 friends, packed tightly around the fire, each of us trying to shake off the creeping sense that something was watching from just beyond the ring of light. We told ourselves it was nothing, just the imagination running wild in the dark, but none of us really believed it. The first few hours passed with whispered conversations and nervous glances toward the treeline. The crackling fire was our only anchor, the warmth a thin barrier against the cold, black woods. Every now and then, a twig snapped in the distance, and we all froze, holding our breath, waiting for the inevitable rustling that would follow. Sometimes it was just a raccoon or a deer, but sometimes the sounds were different, more deliberate, more careful, as if someone or something was moving with purpose. At one point, Jake, the most skeptical of the group, leaned back against a log and laughed softly. "You guys are freaking yourselves out over nothing. It's just the wind, or animals. There's nothing in these woods that wants to hurt us." His words were meant to reassure, but even he looked uneasy. I caught him scanning the shadows more than once, as if trying to convince himself. Then, just as we were beginning to relax, the noises started again. First, the crisp snap of a branch close by, too close. We all turned toward the sound, eyes straining to pierce the darkness. The firelight didn't reach far enough, leaving a deep black veil just beyond the clearing, where the trees stood like silent watchers. It was then that Mark whispered, his voice tight with fear, "Did you see that?" We all looked where he pointed. Just beyond the firelight, a shadow shifted, a dark figure slipping between the trunks. It was quick, almost a blur, but unmistakably there. No one spoke, the air was suddenly heavy, suffocating. We tried to rationalize it, telling ourselves it was a trick of the light, maybe a deer or a raccoon. But the shape was too distinct, too purposeful in its movement. As the minutes passed, the sounds grew more frequent. Branches cracking underfoot, the soft rustle of leaves, and then, whispers. They were faint, barely audible, but unmistakable. The words were indecipherable, like some ancient language spoken just beyond our understanding. The whispers seemed to circle us, carried on the night breeze, coming and going like a tide. No one dared to speak, but we all felt the rising tension. The woods had transformed from a quiet backdrop into a predator's lair. The fire flickered, casting long, unnatural shadows that danced on the trees, and every time the flames dipped, the darkness seemed to press closer, swallowing the edges of our safe zone. Then came the footsteps. Soft at first, almost hesitant, moving around the perimeter of our camp. We could hear the faint crunch of leaves and twigs, the rhythm slow and deliberate, circling us like a hunter stalking prey. The footsteps moved just beyond the firelight, always staying in the shadows, never crossing into the circle of safety. I felt my heart pounding in my chest, each beat echoing in my ears. I wasn't sure if the others heard it too, but the tension was palpable. Jake grabbed a flashlight and shone it toward the sound, the beam cutting through the darkness. For a moment, nothing was visible, just trees and underbrush. Then, from the corner of my eye, I saw movement. Glowing eyes. 2 small points of light reflecting the flashlight's beam, watching us from the edge of the forest. They didn't blink or move, just stared, cold, unblinking, and utterly alien. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up, and a chill ran down my spine. It wasn't an animal I recognized. There was something wrong about those eyes, something not quite natural. The whispers grew louder, mixing with the sound of footsteps that moved faster now, circling closer. The fire sputtered, and the wind picked up, scattering sparks into the night. Panic began to rise in the group. We all knew it was time to act, but fear had frozen us in place. Suddenly, a scream shattered the night. It was Sarah, the youngest of our group, her voice high and desperate. We all turned toward her, but the spot where she had been sitting was empty. The firelight showed only her abandoned backpack and a knocked-over water bottle. She was gone. The shock hit us hard. One of us was missing. The woods, which had felt oppressive moments before, now seemed alive with menace, closing in on us from all sides. We called her name, our voices cracking with fear, but the only response was the whispering wind and the rustle of leaves. Without waiting to argue, Jake grabbed the remaining flashlights, and we gathered our gear. Our plan was simple: find Sarah and get out of there. But as we moved toward the edge of the clearing, the footsteps followed, relentless and unyielding. The whispers turned into low growls, and the glowing eyes multiplied, appearing all around us in the darkness. I remember the sensation of running, not just through the forest, but through a nightmare. Branches clawed at my face and arms, roots threatened to trip me, and the cold night air burned my lungs. The shadows seemed to stretch and twist, reaching for us, trying to drag us back into the dark. We called out for Sarah, but no answer came. The woods swallowed our voices, and the presence behind us never faltered. Every step forward felt like a battle against unseen forces, and the feeling of being hunted was overwhelming. We were no longer a group of friends on a camping trip, we were prey in a place that had no mercy. That night marked the moment when the dark woods ceased to be just a place of quiet beauty. They became something else entirely, a living nightmare that had claimed one of us and threatened to claim the rest. The fear we felt wasn't just from the unknown, it was from knowing that something was out there, watching, waiting, and willing to do whatever it took to keep us trapped in the darkness. The forest was no longer just a backdrop for our fear, it had become an active force, closing in on us with every step. After Sarah disappeared, the panic in our group spiraled into something raw and urgent. We huddled together, hearts hammering, breaths coming in ragged gasps, each of us straining to listen for any sign of her. But the woods offered nothing but that suffocating silence pierced by whispers and the occasional snap of a branch underfoot. The footsteps that had circled us earlier didn't stop, instead, they grew louder and closer, as if whatever was out there was emboldened by our terror. We tried to stay calm, telling ourselves it was an animal or a person playing a cruel trick, but deep down, we knew it was something else, something that didn't belong in the natural world. Jake, usually the voice of reason, was the first to break the fragile calm. "We can't stay here," he said, voice shaking. "We need to find Sarah and get out of these woods." His words cut through the gloom like a knife, and without waiting for debate, we agreed. There was no choice. We grabbed our flashlights and packed our gear, moving cautiously through the thick underbrush toward where Sarah had last been seen. The forest around us seemed to shift and close with every step. Shadows lengthened unnaturally, twisting into shapes that defied explanation. The air grew colder, and the whispers morphed into guttural murmurs that echoed just beyond the beam of our flashlights. I could feel eyes watching us from every direction, invisible but undeniably present. Our progress was slow and tense. Every crack of a twig beneath our feet felt like a beacon, announcing our presence to whatever lurked in the darkness. The group's unease grew with each passing minute. Mark kept glancing back nervously, convinced we were being followed, and every time he stopped, the eerie noises would intensify, as if responding to our fear. Then, out of the corner of my eye, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A pair of eyes, glowing faintly red, appeared in the shadows just beyond the light's reach. The eyes didn't blink or move, but they exuded an ancient malevolence that rooted me to the spot. I whispered to the others, and we all froze, hearts pounding, eyes locked on that single point in the darkness. It was a silent warning, we were not alone, and whatever was watching had no intention of letting us leave. Suddenly, a low, guttural growl rolled through the trees, vibrating in my chest. The sound wasn't like anything I'd heard before, too deep, too primal to be an animal. The growl was followed by a rustling in the underbrush, and then the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy, deliberate, and closing in fast. We broke into a run, stumbling through the tangled roots and fallen branches, adrenaline propelling us forward even as exhaustion threatened to overwhelm. The whispers turned to screams, a cacophony of voices that seemed to come from every direction, disorienting and terrifying us in equal measure. As we fled, Sarah's absence became an unbearable weight. We called her name over and over, our voices hoarse, but the forest swallowed each cry. The sense of loss was immediate and profound, she was gone, taken by something we couldn't see, and the rest of us were next. After what felt like hours, we reached a small clearing, breathless and desperate. The fire we had built earlier was nothing but ashes, and the night sky stretched endlessly above us, indifferent to our plight. But the woods were not done with us yet. Mark was the first to notice the glowing eyes again, this time multiplied, dozens of pairs of eyes staring from the edge of the clearing, unblinking and cold. The realization hit us all at once: we were surrounded. There was no escape, no safe path through the darkness. Panic surged. We tried to back away slowly, but the eyes followed every movement, growing brighter and more numerous. The whispers turned into guttural chants, a language lost to time but filled with menace. The forest itself seemed to pulse with dark energy, as if alive and hungry. In that moment, the true nature of our pursuer became clear: not a man or beast, but something ancient, tied to the woods in a way that defied logic. It was a force of darkness, a presence that had watched these forests for centuries, feeding on fear and pain. We huddled together, sharing desperate whispers, trying to summon the courage to make a break for it. But the forest wasn't just surrounding us, it was closing in, its shadows reaching like fingers, threatening to drag us back into the darkness from which we had come. Then came the scream, piercing, blood-curdling, echoing through the trees. It was Sarah's voice, or at least what we hoped was her. The sound shattered the silence, breaking through the oppressive atmosphere for a brief moment. Our hope flared, and we moved toward the scream, driven by a mix of fear and determination. But the forest was a labyrinth, and the scream led us deeper into its heart. The trees grew thicker, the shadows darker. The voices whispered louder now, chanting in that ancient tongue, surrounding us with their unholy presence. Suddenly, the ground beneath us shifted, and we stumbled into a shallow pit hidden by leaves and branches. As we clambered out, breathless and wounded, I saw something that froze me in place: a twisted figure, half human, half shadow, lurking just beyond the edge of the clearing. Its eyes burned with a malevolent light, and its presence radiated pure malice. We didn't wait to see more. Fear and adrenaline propelled us forward as we fled blindly through the forest, branches tearing at our clothes and skin, the whispers and footsteps relentlessly pursuing us. Every sense screamed at us to run faster, to escape the nightmare that had claimed Sarah and now hunted us all. As dawn approached, the oppressive darkness began to lift, and the sounds of the forest changed. The whispers faded, replaced by the distant calls of birds waking to a new day. We emerged from the trees, battered and broken, but alive, though forever changed by what we had faced. That night in the woods wasn't just a terrifying experience, it was a revelation. The forest held secrets older than time itself, and we had glimpsed something that should have remained hidden. The fear we felt was primal, rooted in a force beyond our understanding, and it left us with scars that would never fully heal. Even now, long after that night, I can't shake the feeling that the woods are still watching, waiting for the next unwary soul to stumble into their grasp. The moment we realized the forest was closing in wasn't just about the eyes watching us or the whispers that echoed like a sinister chant, it was the feeling that we were being hunted by something that wasn't human. We had run blindly through the underbrush, branches scraping our faces and limbs, but the presence behind us never wavered. It was relentless, a force that seemed to meld with the darkness itself. We reached the edge of a small clearing and stopped, gasping for breath, hearts pounding so loudly it felt like they might burst from our chests. The firelight we'd once trusted was gone, replaced by the cold gray of a moonless night. Around us, the trees stood like silent sentinels, their gnarled branches twisting into grotesque shapes. The eyes that had haunted us from the shadows now glowed brighter, multiplied, a sea of unblinking lights that seemed to pierce right through us. Jake, his face pale and drenched in sweat, whispered, "We can't outrun it. It's not human." The truth in his words hit me like a punch to the stomach. We'd been fighting something that wasn't bound by any natural laws, something ancient and malevolent. The whispers around us grew louder, morphing into a chorus of unintelligible voices that seemed to seep from the very soil. The forest itself seemed to pulse with dark energy, a living entity breathing in time with our fear. The boundaries between the trees blurred, and the shadows lengthened, reaching out like grasping hands eager to pull us into their depths. Desperation gripped us. We had no plan, no weapons, just the raw instinct to survive. We moved cautiously toward the far side of the clearing, hoping to find a path that led back to safety. But the shadows shifted, blocking our way, coalescing into a shape that filled us with icy dread. It was a figure, tall and thin, its form blurred and shifting like smoke. Its eyes burned with an unnatural light, and its movements were both fluid and jerky, as if it existed between two worlds. The thing didn't speak, it didn't need to. Its presence alone was a declaration of power and menace. Mark took a trembling step forward, voice barely audible. "What are you?" The figure tilted its head, as if amused by the question, then reached out a hand that seemed to dissolve into mist. The air grew cold, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood on end. I felt the weight of centuries pressing down on us, a history of violence and darkness tied to this place. Suddenly, the creature flickered and vanished, leaving behind only the lingering chill and the echoes of its haunting presence. The whispers subsided, replaced by an oppressive silence that was heavier than the darkness itself. We knew then that we weren't dealing with a person, or even an animal, but with something far older, some malevolent force bound to the forest, a guardian or predator that had claimed these woods as its own. It was a presence that didn't just watch from the shadows but lived within them, a dark spirit that fed on fear and suffering. Our only choice was to run. We sprinted through the trees, branches clawing at our skin, roots threatening to trip us with every step. The forest seemed to resist us, twisting pathways and closing off escape routes. Behind us, the whispers returned, louder and more insistent, as if the forest was enraged at our defiance. At one point, I stumbled and fell, scraping my hands and knees on the rough ground. When I looked up, I saw the others disappearing into the shadows, their flashlight beams flickering like fragile beacons in the gloom. Panic surged through me as I scrambled to my feet, desperate not to be left alone. The chase led us deeper into the woods, into places where the trees grew so close together that the sky disappeared entirely. The air was thick and cold, every breath sharp and painful. The whispers became chants, rhythmic and hypnotic, wrapping around me like chains. Then, through the dense forest, I caught a glimpse of movement, Sarah. She was standing just beyond a cluster of trees, her figure pale and still, eyes wide with terror but eerily vacant. I called out to her, voice cracking, but she didn't respond. Instead, she began to drift backward, slowly retreating into the shadows. As I moved toward her, the darkness seemed to ripple and pulse. The forest was alive, and it was claiming her. A sudden scream tore from her lips, raw and filled with despair. I reached for her hand, but before I could touch her, the shadows swallowed her whole, leaving nothing but silence. The weight of helplessness crashed over me. We had lost Sarah to this ancient force, and the forest was not done with us yet. Behind me, I heard the footsteps closing in once more, the whispers rising to a fevered pitch. I turned to run, heart pounding, lungs burning, but the woods had changed. Paths I thought I knew twisted into new, impossible directions. The trees seemed to breathe, their branches reaching out to trap me. The forest itself was a labyrinth designed to hold me forever. Somehow, I found the strength to push forward, fueled by fear and the desperate will to survive. After what felt like an eternity, I burst through the tree line into a faint glow of dawn. The oppressive darkness lifted slightly, and the birds began their morning songs, oblivious to the horrors that had unfolded beneath their branches. I collapsed to the ground, gasping for air, tears streaming down my face. The forest behind me was silent once more, but the memory of that night, of the shadowy figure and the relentless presence, stayed with me. I knew, without a doubt, that the woods had marked me. That malevolent force wasn't just a story or a nightmare, it was real, ancient, and still watching. And somewhere deep within those dark trees, the boundary between our world and something far darker remained dangerously thin. Even now, years after that terrifying night, I can't escape the weight of what we experienced in those dark woods. The fear we felt wasn't just a fleeting panic, it left deep, lasting scars that have shaped the way I see the world. It wasn't just the loss of Sarah or the relentless chase through the forest, it was the realization that some places hold power beyond our understanding, places where the boundary between reality and nightmare isn't just thin, but practically non-existent. After escaping the forest, the trauma clung to us like a second skin. Nights were restless, filled with shadows that seemed to move just beyond the edge of vision, and dreams haunted by whispering voices and glowing eyes. We tried to explain it away, stress, exhaustion, the mind playing tricks, but deep down, we knew the truth was far more unsettling. The woods had marked us, and that mark has never faded. In the months and years that followed, I encountered others who had similar stories, strangers who spoke of eerie forests where they felt watched, of strange lights and inexplicable sounds that defied logic. Each tale was different, but all shared the same core, the feeling of being hunted, of something ancient lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. One friend told me about a cabin deep in another forest, where scratching and tapping at the windows kept him awake night after night. Another described a shadowy figure that appeared at the edge of his campfire light, vanishing whenever he tried to get closer. These weren't isolated incidents but part of a larger, unsettling pattern, an invisible thread connecting those who had glimpsed the darkness lurking in the wilderness. The woods have always been a place of mystery, a natural world that humbles and terrifies in equal measure. But what I've come to understand is that beneath the beauty lies a darker truth. The forest is a living, breathing entity, older than any human memory, and it guards its secrets jealously. It's a place where the veil between worlds thins, where shadows hold more than just absence of light, and where fear can manifest into something real and dangerous. I've seen firsthand how that fear can consume a person, twisting their perception until reality and nightmare blur into one. The ancient force we encountered wasn't just a figment of imagination or folklore, it was a presence that thrived on our terror, feeding off the primal fear that the dark woods evoke. It was patient, cunning, and utterly merciless. Even now, when I'm far from those forests, I can feel its presence lurking at the edge of my senses. Sometimes it's the snap of a twig behind me on a quiet trail, other times a whisper carried on the wind just before sleep. It's a reminder that the dark woods never truly let you go. They stay with you, a shadow in your mind, a chill in your bones. Since that first night, I've collected stories, 3 in particular, that haunt me. Each involves encounters with the inexplicable, moments when the natural world twisted into something sinister, and the feeling of being watched or hunted was undeniable. These stories aren't just tales to scare or entertain, they are warnings. They remind us that some places are not meant to be disturbed, that some secrets are best left buried beneath the roots and soil. The dark woods are a place where reality bends, where the familiar becomes strange, and where the line between life and something else is razor thin. They hold a primal terror, one that taps into our deepest fears of the unknown and the unseen. And as much as we try to rationalize it, to convince ourselves that it's all in our heads, the truth lingers in the silence between the trees. I still wonder about Sarah and what became of her in those woods. Her disappearance was the catalyst for everything that followed, a stark reminder of how fragile our hold on safety can be. The others and I escaped, but we were forever changed, haunted by what we saw and heard. The forest didn't just take her, it took a part of us all. Sometimes, when the wind is just right, I swear I can hear the whispers again, faint and distant, calling from the shadows. It's as if the woods are still alive with that ancient presence, waiting patiently for the next soul to wander too far into the dark. And I know that no matter how far I run, or how much time passes, that presence will always be there, watching, waiting, and reminding me that the nightmare we escaped may never truly end.